Good morning and welcome to Over the Target. I'm so glad you decided to join us this morning. We have a fantastic show. I'm Lee Smith, and we're going to be speaking with a very interesting character. I'm sure some of you have been following him on social media, and you may have read some of his articles. Former Marine Corps officer and also a former CIA paramilitary operations officer. And we're going to be speaking with him this morning about how things have changed, how the national security establishment has changed over the last decade or so, and how the country has changed as well. And there's no one, I think, who has better insight into this than our guest here, Max Morton. Max, greetings, and thank you for being with us on Over the Target this morning.
Good morning, Lee. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Look, I mean, so one of the things that your articles for American Greatness, I know you haven't written there for a little while, and I highly recommend that our viewers go to American Greatness and read some of your great stuff. What I wanted to talk about is something that you wrote on social media, Twitter, just the other day, and I think our producers are going to put it up. But it was a very interesting exchange. And you described it's a little small there. I don't know if we'll be able to see it. Maybe we'll get it larger. You said that the different things that we're seeing now regarding this censorship consortium, the whole stuff about disinformation, which is effectively just another word to validate. Here we go. Here we can see it. Hold on, right down there. Let me read this off because it's a little small. I knew this was coming years ago when all the IC surrogates, intelligence community surrogates, like McChrystal, General Stanley McChrystal, started talking about countering disinformation and the need to redefine individual liberty to save American democracy. So, yeah, if you can elaborate on that, because it's pretty surprising that this is what you were hearing from some of the top brass. And General McChrystal, retired General Stanley McChrystal, of course, he's a famous, famous special operations top commander. And so this is the guy, along with others, who were saying stuff like, yeah, we might have to reinterpret, or as they say about policing, we may have to reimagine civil liberties. So what was going on back then, and how did that happen?
Well, Lee, this started, I guess, about 2016, 2017. I started seeing interviews with different personalities, Stanley McChrystal being one of them. He runs a McChrystal Consulting Group, really a powerhouse consulting agency, and they service a lot of Fortune 500 companies. And in the process, they are interviewed by NPR and CBS and all the big name media outlets. And and it wasn't just General McChrystal. It was a lot of former IC individuals that, I had worked with for or adjacent to during my time at CIA. And in these interviews, they were talking about the necessity due to, Russian disinformation and foreign disinformation for America to get a grip on the internet information that was inundating citizens. Because after all, hey, we have all these conspiracy theories going on, and we have all this talk about, how America is failing here or doing this thing wrong here. And it's all because of some foreign government's disinformation program. And perhaps we need to readdress some of these civil liberties in terms like the First Amendment in order to counter this. And that seemed to be filtering down to some of the lower levels and podcasts with former, special forces folks who run in the middle Twitter circles. And it all seemed to tie into the theme of, hey, we need our own propaganda mechanism here within the United States in order to counter this evil, disinformation that's coming from the bad guys overseas. And it just so happens that in 2013, the Obama administration had rolled back, or, what they want to say, they updated the Smith-Mundt Act, which was a law designed to prevent organizations like the State Department from being able to propagandize or disseminate American propaganda to American citizens. And the update of the Smith-Mundt Act basically just removed that restriction. So
So,
this,
so what does that, does it mean now that, I mean, that basically opened the floodgates? Now the national security establishment, whether it's people, whether it's a Foggy Bottom or whether it's the Pentagon, that now they're free to propagandize the American public on social media or in the press?
yeah, Lee, pretty much what that update of the Smith-Mundt Act, I think it was the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, that passed in December of 2012, but it was part of the 2013 whole NDAA thing. And what that did is it basically allowed the State Department and its NGOs to disseminate propaganda directly to Americans. Now, the Department of Defense is bound by U.S. Code 2241 to not intentionally propagandize Americans, and the intelligence community is restricted by Executive Order 12333 to not intentionally propagandize Americans. But the way they get around this is by saying, hey, we're not targeting Americans on social media. We're not targeting Americans by paying for certain information to be disseminated in the regular American media. We're targeting people overseas. We're targeting foreigners. But let's face it, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all the social media, even the mainstream media outlets, everybody watches that. So really this is like indirectly targeting Americans under the name of trying to propagandize foreigners.
Well, it's like what some of the services do by reverse targeting, right? They say, oh no, we're going after foreigners, but what they're really doing is they're spying on American citizens, and that's the purpose of reverse targeting. So, what was the urgency that they needed to reevaluate proliferating propaganda to the American public? I mean, was it that we're so worried about Twitter, we're so worried about Facebook, we have to be able to control this and block some things off and push other things out? Was that their rationalization?
I think that was exactly it, Lee. I mean, let's face it, the internet, the social media, it really started gaining steam, in the mid 2000s. And I think that frightened the establishment in Washington, and they couldn't control the information flow to Americans anymore. There was too much competing information coming in. And, there's always the wacky QAnon conspiracy theorists and all that stuff. But I don't think that's what was really bothering them as much as it was independent journalists, influencers on social media, basically looking under the covers and saying, hey, what we're getting from CNN is not the truth. What we're getting from the Department of Defense in these press conferences, this is not the truth. And I think some of that started, let's face it, with the invasion in Iraq. And when we discovered that was kind of done for a big lie. And I think it shocked people. And over the years, people became less trustful of what they were hearing from the government, and then started seeking out these alternative, information sources. And I think the 2013 Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, and then seeing some of these, heavy retired generals and intelligence community officials coming out and start like floating these trial balloons. I think that was the establishment or the ruling class, whatever, in Washington. That was their initial foot in the door to say, hey, listen, we're going to fix this information problem so we can get control of the narrative again.
So before, I mean, this is really really alarming. So before social media, their belief would have been, well, look, if there's difficult information that's coming out, we can control it in different ways. There's only a few news channels, and the people who are writing for some of these places, no one's ever going to read it, right? There's some pamphleteer. It might as well be a guy with a sign around his neck saying the world is coming to an end in the middle of Times Square. No one's paying attention. But now with social media, there's more stuff. So I mean, were they actively controlling information prior to 2016, prior to 2017, when you first started to see this?
Oh, I think they definitely were.
Hmm.
Not to the level that they are now, because the different information sources are just are too vast. I mean, it's almost because the information sources are so widespread and varied that you can see the attempts to control a narrative here. But if you remember back, New York Times was running those fluff pieces on the invasion of Iraq, and I forget the reporter's name, the gal who was doing that, and it turned out that she was just being managed or handled by Department of Defense senior officials, and kind of backing the lie about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That's a great example of how the government and some of these agencies and departments in Washington were able to control the narrative and control the information that was going to, your average normie citizens out there, and essentially, getting them to support something that, if they knew the truth, they wouldn't support at all.
Max, I want to ask you, you've got to cut away for a second, but when we come back, I want to ask you, you were in Iraq, you served in Iraq, you were with the Marine Corps, then you were with the CIA. And I want to get some sense of how these actual disinformation and the control of information, how it affected people in our nation's uniform, how it affected people in the CIA who were serving the government that time honorably. I want to get your sense of that right now. This is fantastic background on how the disinformation regime, the censorship consortium came to be. We're here with Max Morton. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, please make the jump with us. We're cutting away right now, and we'll be going exclusively to Epoch TV. So make sure you make the jump with us. We're only going to be gone for a little less than a minute. Make the jump. You don't want to miss a second of what Max